Okay, we're all set. Thank you very much, Terry, for the intro, and Neil and I will walk you through. So kind of like some words about me. As you can hear by my accent, I'm an Israeli, okay? But if Gal Gadot can do Wonder Woman, I can manage this. So as Terry mentioned, I'm Director of Product Management for the Real Device Cloud. I'm sure you're aware, so Sauce Labs kind of like 7-8 months ago acquired a company from Berlin, from Germany, TestObject. And TestObject is the brand for the Real Device Cloud. Although it's two separate platforms, we will discuss about it. We are going and integrating that into one. So I'm running the TestObject product management. I have over 20 years of experience in software engineering. That's my entire career, everything around Azure software engineering, quality engineering, test automation frameworks. That's what I do basically the entire career. Before that, yeah, as you can see, I was the chief product owner of Perfecto Mobile and happily did the switch to Sauce Labs. And I had my own company before that running Tencode was kind of like a framework on top of Appium, kind of like a solution for those who are kind of like facing the difficult to do the switch from manual testing into test automation. And I think many are facing this challenge. And hopefully we will be able to present you and see how we can make it easier. And I was also the area product owner of SAP, everything around software engineering. My mission, I think it was 2011, was taking SAP from huge waterfall into agile and mobile. SAP has around about 5,000 developers developing mobile. And we needed to come up with the strategy, the tools, the processes. And I was leading the team of product in order to come up with the solution. So yeah, that's basically me. And Neil will present himself.
My name is Neil Manvar. I think some of you were in my talk or track yesterday. And I serve as a solutions architect for Sauce Labs. And what that really means is I want to help our customers deliver quality code frequently, whether it's onboarding or professional services and so forth. Also, I was a front-end software engineer at Yahoo, where I created the test automation framework that's still in use today. It's used in all the CI/CD pipelines that runs the tests massively in parallel to make sure that it's quality code. And had a few internships at Yahoo before that. So not as extensive as a career at Soft. Look to get there one day.
Well, he will show you his magic. He's doing great. Don't be modest. That's fine.
And I went to UC Davis. Go Aggies.
Okay, so let's talk about digital. Okay, the world goes digital. By the way, originally we thought about discussing just mobile, but if we look at the entire spectrum, and actually the world is digital today, right? You have different devices, the different endpoints, where you start like your sessions or like your daily internet activity. You start from web, you switch to mobile, you interact with your devices in different kind of forms and factors, and that's a digital world. And within that, if we focus on mobile, so we see that mobile apps today, that's a recent survey, like at the end of around about November, December last year, of mobile apps, which is accounted for 58% of total time spent. Okay, and we see the growth on mobile throughout the years. So the last 3 years, it's around about 43% increase, which is huge. And I talked with a lot of customers also in the last 3 days with many customers of Sauce who are trying to get on board mobile and within their testing CI strategy and how to adopt it. A lot are in a very early stages of either having some devices locally under the table trying to do some automation. Some have this level of testing on mobile, but it's really basic, and people are trying to get on board and need help. And that's why Neil and I come up with thought about strategy and how it is. But I guess everyone is dealing with mobile, right? Who deals with mobile today? Yeah. Who are you doing automation on mobile? How many of you? Much less hands, yeah. So that's our mission. We are here to help you to come up with the tools, the strategy, and really help you be successful around it. Okay? So when you switch into web, basically, not just mobile in general, and we see that the web is a world of screens. Okay? Day by day, the number of devices, platform, browsers, accessing your site, if you are doing web, not just native application, it just grows and grows dramatically. And how do we tackle that? And we need to address that. So there is the move into responsive website. Many sites are still not responsive, but we see the big trend into responsive websites. And then how do you test it? How you come up with the right tools around it? If we look at traffic based on devices, we see that mobile phones are accounted for 50% of devices. And we see the huge of accessing devices and increase year over year by 30%. Okay? One can look at this graph and might say, okay, so although it's increased by 30% on mobile phone, the desktop goes down. That's wrong. It's not what this graph says. It says that mobile is booming like crazy. Okay? Mobile is expanding. Desktop is kind of like stable throughout the years, and it's still 45%. Okay? So it might go to 40% in years, but it doesn't mean that the amount of desktops is fading. It's here to stay, and we need to address that both. And tablets are kind of like stable, although a little bit declined. And maybe the new iPad by Apple will change that, but who knows, okay? So that's the traffic that we see. That's a recent report, and we need to deal with all that, okay? So moving forward, we have the question of web or native, okay? How exactly are we going to respond it? Okay, how do we respond it? Not in terms of development. When it comes to development, it's kind of like a religious war. One says native, the other says web, and you cannot really win this argument. There are organizations who deal with both. There are organizations who found the right solution to do native or web, but how do we address it and how do we respond to that in terms of like our testing strategy? What do we need to cover? Okay, so there are some questions of what exactly you would like to achieve. Okay, what do you want to do? And what are your goals? How important speed and performance? If this is a very important thing, then this is clearly a native application, and you need to deal with that in terms of testing. You need to address testing in terms of performance, in terms of functionality when it's on high load, and this is very important. Do you need to test device specific? Okay, if there is something which addresses this kind of sensor on the mobile device, like a camera or the GPS or rotation and stuff like that. In many cases, you need to do it on real devices. There are some mocks, some mock-up capabilities, or some way to trick that also with emulators and simulator. But if you're really targeting some specific devices, there are customers who have specific devices that they use across the organization internally, and they only need this. So here, real devices come to the rescue into that. They need support for different platforms and devices. Okay, if you want to test on multiple platforms, multiple devices, again, that's where might be web will come to handy. It will help you because you will be able to develop one application to test them all. But there might be cases where real devices come to sense. Budget and time to market. In many times when an organization needs to deal with delivery to the market as soon as possible, they choose the path of web applications because you develop once and then you can easily hit the market. So that's the motivation around it, and the budget-wise, you do not need to hold the experience and budgeting into iOS development and Android development. You just have one team to deal with it, and comes again testing that you need to do web testing. If you need integration into app stores, marketplaces, that's important. Emulators Simulators or like web application, that's a challenge. Real devices come to the rescue into that, and then you need to test it. Also, be able to install your application, do the switch into different Play Store, install another application, have some dependencies with Play Stores and the relevant versioning around it. And how do you tackle that? We know, like if we talk about Appium, there were limitations before that you live within the context of the application, right? You cannot do this context switch from my application to the system or to the Play Store, to the App Store, installing some stuff, everything within that. This was kind of like moved when we moved to Exitest, right, as the foundation, and that's come handy. If you need to monetize your application, maybe you have integration with different advertising libraries with different vendors. You need to integrate it into your application. Again, comes different testing that you need to do it. So there are different types of application. There are different targets, either web or native, and how do you tackle that? In many cases, again, within organization, there are a different dedicated team for web, different dedicated team to do mobile. Within mobile, also, there are some teams who are doing iOS. There are also teams who are doing Android. And when it comes to testing, how do you deal with it? There is a framework for doing web testing, either on desktop, or it might come also desktop and mobile web. There are teams who are doing test automation framework for Android or iOS, and again, you need to maintain this all. You need to have a framework for each one of those. Means you need to have different expertise. You need to have the integration into the builds, into the push request, into CI for those who are advanced. And when there are different frameworks, different reporting. How do you go and analyze each one of those? How do you deal with all this amount of data, huge amount of data? And this leads us into solutions later on that will help you combine those into one. Okay. When we move forward, there is the question and another dilemma around emulators, simulators, or real devices. I talk with customers, and they are asking us, help us. Let me know, what do I do with emulator and simulator? When do I use real devices? What's the right use case? And it's all come to the question, again, what you would like to achieve. What is your use case? Okay? So if we look at this triangle, we try to kind of like simplify that. And we say, if you deal with emulators and simulators, that's come really, really handy and great when you need to have a huge functional test on the high volume of tests on large builds. Okay? And you need to have frequent build with very high concurrency. You know that you can spin a lot of emulators and simulators. It depends on what is your license permit, but in general, you can scale it up like to forever. Okay? And emulator simulator testing really comes handy in these cases. If you want fast feedback, if you want to have it within each like push request, that's a good solution for emulators and simulator. When it comes to device testing on Wi-Fi or different emulation tools, either network tools or network emulation tools, if you need stable feature, you have a stable feature, the application is available, you can deploy it on the real device. That's where real device comes handy. If you want to distribute your tests between different makes, models, form factors, I want to execute either my web application, which is responsive on phone, on tablets, on portrait, on landscape, this and that screen resolution, which is huge. If you want to have UX testing, exact UX testing, which is applicable to a certain layout or a certain implementation of different devices. We know, for example, that Samsung has their touch width, which is different. So if you have kind of like notification and you integrated it, how does it look like within this and that model or manufacturers? And that's where real devices really comes handy. If you want to integrate into network emulation, having different capabilities, how my application acts and behaves on 4G network, what happens if I do the switch to 3G? What happens if I have 20% packet loss? How do I emulate and simulate it? So you can have real devices along with tools like 1M or NetM, network emulation kind of tools, which are basically Linux boxes that you configure with different parameters and configurations. And then you can go and execute your test using those, and you can really simulate real user conditions and how it actually might behave. I take my application, I'm within a transaction with my banking account, I walk into the elevator, I lose connectivity, what happens then? Okay, so these are the tools which really come handy, and you could do this with real devices on the cloud and network emulation tools and capabilities that come handy. And if you need to test on real devices, on networks, so if you need to test specific cases on actual carrier networks, I want to have my device connected to T-Mobile or to Verizon or to Deutsche Telekom, this kind of networks, and you can have the ability to really have devices with SIM cards connected to the cloud, and you can do everything possible manually or automated. So that's where a real device comes handy that is connected to the network. In addition to that, we have the use of emulator and simulator to save costs. Clearly, it's less expensive than real devices. And Emulators Simulator by nature have low error rate. You always gauge the same device. You start from scratch, you go into the same path, and it's prone for errors, and it's really something which is great applicable for that. If you have zero tolerance for false negatives, flaky tests, etc., all depends on what is your framework and your test, how you develop that, but in general, Emulators Simulators is perfect for that. And real devices, as I mentioned, panel and compatibility testing. You want to test it on a specific device manufacturers. I want this HTC model, this and that. That's how it goes. If you want to replicate an issue, your support or your team got a request for some defect that was reported on Android version 4.4.1 on this and that device. That's where a real device comes handy, and you need to debug it on this device. You cannot really skip real devices in that. Pixel perfect, again, on display testing, how it actually look like on exactly the same. I can see the screen of the device, exactly it will look like, and not on an emulator, which is kind of generic. If you have another dependency, I want, again, to access this sensor that is available, or some libraries like the ARM library, low-level connectivity on the device to the device hardware from the application. That's how it is, and custom operating system always. Also, like LG has its own custom operating system, Samsung has its own custom operating system, and stuff like that, okay? So when we deal with all this goodness, okay, we have tons of capabilities. We have desktops, web, we have emulators and simulators that can run native or web application. We have real devices that can deal with emulators and simulator. How do we deal with it? In many organizations, as I mentioned, each one has its own framework, each one doing that a little bit different and develop from scratch. And many approach us and say, please help us, let us know where do we start, let us know how do we define the strategy around that. And along that, Neil and I discuss and say, let's come up with a framework that will be able to get you on board and start really from scratch and targeting all that. Why not having one framework that you can target web on emulators, simulators, or desktop, that can target native applications, also on emulators, simulators, and real devices, and all within one space. Later on, eventually, the reporting will also be integrated. This will come into analytics and the ability to do dive in and get insights from that and into that. And eventually, what we decided, we have developed this framework, which we call them, all the things digital. It's kind of like one testing framework to rule them all, and not having the ability to deal with that and start everything from scratch. Neil will demonstrate that. It's available on GitHub. It's kind of like an open source. This is based on Java and TestNG. Our plan, post the conference, we will also do the migration. I see a lot of camera, which is great. Yeah, it's there. It's live. It's available for you now. You can take it later. and we will do it in Ruby and Python, different languages, different frameworks. So everyone who has their own stuff based on what is your framework, you will be able to take that and utilize this on built on top. And we will continue to enhance it based as the platform evolves. Okay? So I'll hand over to Neil to walk you through. And later on, I will come back and summarize a little bit. Cool. Let me just put it like that. Awesome. No.
HDMI cables, they're tough. Okay, so first thing, let's figure out what we're testing. What we're gonna, as Asaf mentioned, it's gonna be a responsive web application and also a mobile app. First, let's go through the web application. And ironically, it is saucelabs.com. And here, it renders as such on a desktop. And you can see, if we go to a lower resolution, it then goes into the mobile responsive design. And what we're gonna be testing is the invalid username and password flow. So click sign in. It'll take you to this screen right here. And then enter in an invalid username and password. click sign in and verify this statement is present. Obviously, this flow is different for a mobile test because you have to click this menu and then go to sign in. Now, we don't want to have to write the same test twice and maintain 2 sets of tests for this functionality, right? It's all one code base, all one flow in the code, but there should not be 2 separate tests. We should be able to use one test and test this functionality throughout all the different devices, emulators, browsers, on desktops as well. The second test that we're going to be doing is actually on a mobile test, and it's just a dummy application right here where you can enter in a comment, and then you click send, and we're just verifying the comment gets put here. And what we're going to do here is we're going to have one test that gets run for Android and iOS. Now, you guys might be asking, how are you accomplishing this? What about the separate page objects? How are you loading it dynamically? What about the different flows and so forth? So I'm going to take you in step by step through the code, through the test. So first, let's go through the login test. Here, we're going to create the driver, and then use the page object and page factory methods to visit the page and go to login. Now, go to login might be different for mobile, right? We have to click the menu and then click sign in. Then we're going to enter in the credentials for an invalid login. And then lastly, the assertion. Make sure that the invalid login message is there. Now, this test is getting fed in a data provider called hard-coded browsers. Let's take a quick look at that. We want to run this test on all of these devices right here. All the different desktop browsers, the emulators, the simulators, the real devices for iOS, and here we have one tablet, one phone, as well as Android real devices, one tablet, one phone. Similarly, we're going to have the mobile native test, which will load up the page factory for mobile, submit the comment, and verify that the submitted comment appears. So appears here. And we want to run this across various devices, emulators, and simulators. So let's check out that data provider. So here we have the Google Pixel, Samsung Galaxy Tab, and various iPhone, iPad, simulator, emulator, and real devices. So what's happening in every test is when we instantiate the driver in the before, we are also creating a page factory. And we're passing in the page object name. And the page object name is right here. So this is what's governing what page objects to load up. Desktop web, we got Android, we got mobile native, and so forth. So on the fly, per every test case, it knows what configuration it's going to run on. It pulls up the appropriate page objects. Now, the next question probably is, how are you keeping the standardization amongst the page objects? How do you know this page object method exists for mobile native or for Android web? And that is done by object-oriented programming and interfaces. So let's take a look at the page factory. Here, it just has 2 simple methods, create sauce homepage and create sauce login page. Now, this page factory is implemented on top of for all the other page factories. So desktop web page factory has its own create sauce homepage, and that returns its appropriate page object. And then we have interfaces. So if we take a look here, we define the guinea pig page object, or let's say the login page object, by having these 2 methods, invalid login and the check to make sure that the invalid message is there. So if we take a look at one of these login pages, you can see it extends the base page and then implements the login page. Here we have all the selectors pertinent to the application, as well as we implement and override the invalid login method and is invalid message method. And as you see, here's mobile web login page, and this is going to send keys and then click sign in button. But the one that we're curious about that's different about mobile is actually go to login. And you guys can see here is the click of the menu button, right? For the mobile responsive web app, you have to click the menu and then click sign in. Now, if we look at the desktop one, that one is very simple. You can just see all it does is click sign in button. But now, when I say desktop homepage or whatever homepage, .go to login, it'll do the appropriate flows to get to the login page and then go to enter in credentials. Similar approach for the native mobile app as well. Here we have our iOS native page factory, where we have create guinea pig page as well as Android page factory, and the page objects associated there. So you can see here is submit comment, and this is what it looks like for Android. And here's the Android selectors, as well as you can see I'm doing a hide keyboard and then clicking the submit button. And for iOS, similar thing, but no hide keyboard necessary here. Now comes the interesting part. Let's go ahead and run this. So I have my environment variable set up, which will feed into the framework and run appropriately. And here we have our test object web access key, iOS access key, and Android access key, as well as the sauce credentials set up as environment variables. All you have to do here is Maven test, and this will spin up all the tests in parallel. So now if I look on sauce, I should be seeing these tests coming in and being executed in parallel. And also on test object, I can see the test being executed in parallel as well, as seen right here. So this test is running, as well as these tests right here and these tests right here. So everything is running in parallel for a responsive web application across emulators, simulators, desktop browsers, and real devices, as well as for mobile on real devices and emulators and simulators for the mobile native application. And this is all done within one framework. You can see it's one test that I wrote, and it's applying to all the different interfaces and configurations. So let's take a look at some tests that got executed. So here is a test success for the invalid login test. We can see that it clicks sign in, goes here, and then enters in the credentials and invalid. Here's the same test. Now on a mobile page, we can see that it had to click the menu right there, and then click sign in, then enter the invalid credentials. Then we also have the native application as well. So here is how it was tested on Android. And the same would have happened on iOS. So here is the comments that got entered in. Now, on the test object side, we can see the test as well. And the same invalid login test will have executed on a real device, just as it did for the emulator, simulator, and desktop web browsers. So the goal here is reusability. Use what these frameworks and technologies give you. Use abstractions, use interfaces to standardize the page object so that you can reuse the test and apply it to all the various configurations. Because what you don't want to do is rewrite the same test just for a different configuration. That's twice as hard to maintain. That's twice as many tests that can go wrong as well. So here it happened on an iPad. And what's unique here is the iPad actually, since it has a higher resolution, it's loading up the desktop experience. So that's why in my test base file, where I define my page object to be loaded, as well as the configuration, for iPad, I am saying desktop web, because that's the experience that gets loaded up. But on an iOS or iPhone device, it is the iOS responsive version. So once again, the point I wanted to make here is you can use this type of framework or this type of approach, and we're going to contribute more to these type of open source resources to enforce and help you guys with testing best practices and make sure you get the most out of our offering and make sure we get the feedback to your developers as soon as possible regarding their code changes, not only on desktop web browsers, but also on mobile. And as Asaf said, you can scale this with emulators, simulators, and real devices, as we have all of that to run on, and each one has their benefits, but it's about making sure you have solid tests that can run in parallel, get the feedback that you need across all the various devices and configurations that your customers use and you need to certify on before deploying to production. So that concludes the demo piece of it. I'm going to hand it back to Asaf.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Is it on? Yeah. So what I wanted to summarize is basically many that jump onto mobile or within the two different areas between web and native, emulators, simulators, real devices, all that kind of, like what I said, the goodness. We show that it's really a matter of defining the right strategy to have the right framework in place and having that. So this is a very good basis for you, maybe to learn, maybe to use it and grow on top of that, or just get some ideas how to really build something that will be easier to maintain and to load. And as Neil mentioned and showed, we have kind of like the test object and we have the Sauce Labs, and we see two different platforms. So this is the current state. We are now building and investing a lot in the integration of these two platforms. Lubush, in his keynote speak, which starts the last keynote today at 4 p.m., will walk you through the roadmap to see how we're coming from two separate platforms into one and elaborate on that all along. But still today at the moment, because that's the standard Appium, that's the standard Selenium, you have full support either on both platforms, whether it's real devices, emulators or simulator. Within, you develop once and you are able to scale that and target it to each one of the platforms. Nonetheless, it will be integrated into one, and I will show you that. So that's basically what we wanted to present. Any questions for us? Yeah.
Is there a plugin for reporting? I see all the reporting comes in through the Sauce Labs to go to, like, say, Jira, for instance, so that the developers and the entire team can see what's going on.
Yeah, so we have integration into that and the ability to send the results also to do the connection there.
And it's just a plugin that you would add.
Yeah, within our integration to the...
Yeah, so we have a Jira plugin from within Sauce Labs. If it's configured, you can directly go to this test that failed and say file Jira ticket, and it'll automatically send all the assets and information into Jira. In addition to that, we have the REST APIs, which you can build all the dashboards around, and literally whatever you see on our UI or infrastructure, you can import and do whatever you want with.
That's what we're using right now.
Okay.
Dashboards and Jira separate.
Okay.
Yeah. The same with test object, so you have the plugin from the UI to connect to your Jira account or to GitHub and publish that from there. So, but again, as I mentioned, everything will be converged into.
Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, so still you can catch up later on. We are here, available to all your questions to support you and get you going. Thank you very much.